Rupert Murdoch, now in his 70s, is one of the most powerful men alive and determined as ever to hold on to life and his empire. He's also convinced that all his power should stay in the family once he's gone. The power of a Murdoch information empire which already reaches more than 2 in every 3 people on Earth. The unstoppable and only son of a wealthy Melbourne family, Rupert Murdoch has carried a family dream way beyond anyone's wildest imaginings.
I do sometimes feel uncomfortable when people say, oh, you know, Rupert's so wonderful, you must be so proud. He's a great man. A lot of those people think it's because he's made money, and that's not greatness. No, it's part, perhaps, if you, it's very satisfactory if you do earn very well and are so-called, this awful word, rich. The point is what you do with it.
The thrill of success is in how many people you get to watch your television programs, how many people you get to buy your newspapers, and how do they react to them. And if you're doing that well, the rest looks after itself.
The sun never sets on the Murdoch empire, a kingdom the Murdoch children are being groomed to inherit. This is the story of a single-minded dynasty, 3 tightly bound generations of a family with journalism at its heart. A media dynasty started by Rupert's ambitious father, Keith.
I don't know of any son of any prominent media family who hasn't wanted to follow in the footsteps of his forebears. It's just too great a life.
I don't think we ever realized that we were in an extraordinary family. And I still think in many ways we're not in an extraordinary family. We're an ordinary family with ordinary family issues in perhaps extraordinary circumstances.
To control your own destiny, you have to be able to have control as much as possible of the company. And therefore, it is very important that the family maintain their position in the company.
What you've seen is almost the recreation of a kind of 19th century English aristocracy taking place here. That there is a new media aristocracy that he wants to create, in which the top jobs will go to people with the name Murdoch.
In the Murdoch family, winning is everything, and the thrill of the gamble is in the blood. Rupert Murdoch's maternal grandfather was Rupert Green, at one time the official starter of the Melbourne Cup. Grandpa Green was a charming rogue and the impetuous spirit of the Murdoch family. He was also a chronic gambler and always in financial trouble.
Whatever money he made, he lost gambling. He was a sportsman. He'd been a great cricketer. He was a very popular man around town. He was a character. And he indulged my mother hopelessly, according to her sisters. Hopelessly. She was absolutely the favorite.
I was horrified with his bad language, because he occasionally said bloody. I never heard another word. I didn't know anything about the 4-letter words until I was middle-aged.
The easily shocked Elizabeth then produced a shock of her own. At 19, she was wooed by the middle-aged newspaper publisher Keith Murdoch. Keith was 23 years older, and their first outing provoked a scandal.
Oh, it's a terrible uproar in the family. I was never to see him again. No respectable girl ever went out like that all day with a man.
This despite the fact that he was the son of a Presbyterian clergyman, the Reverend Patrick Murdoch. Keith finally secured Elizabeth's hand, and the couple married in 1928 with the blessing of both fathers. The clergyman and the gambler had now laid the genetic foundations of a dynasty. Keith Murdoch would set the family's future course and create its values.
My father meant a tremendous amount to me and always has. I remember him as a figure not only whom I loved, but who I had a wonderful experience being with. He was always an example to me. He had a great sense of fun. Always left me with a very clear sense that the media was something different as an industry, and that it carried, great moral obligations.
Journalism was Keith Murdoch's pulpit, and he was never afraid to preach. From his early brief career as a war correspondent to his life as a publisher, he was always controversial and well-connected. He acquired a substantial mansion in Melbourne's Toorak and gave Rupert and his 3 sisters an affluent and happy start in life. Sheltered from the Depression and war, it was a privileged existence. Family weekends and holidays were spent at Cruden Farm outside Melbourne, which today remains the home of Rupert's mother, Dame Elizabeth.
They didn't have many material things, but then they had the farm and they had ponies here. But of course, you would say, of course, in many ways they had things to spoil them, but they were never spoilt. And they were not a bit selfish, really. We were lucky to be able to give them that sort of upbringing, to appreciate the country and all those sort of things, and not worry about material things. I'm sure that's far too much materialism today.
The young Rupert and his sisters were raised in a Presbyterian world of love and moral discipline. And it was Mother who enforced the rules.
I can remember once, I think I was 3 or 4, my elder sister had long plaits, and I used to sort of hang on them and torture, and she'd scream. I did it once too often. I got the slipper.
I took the slipper to Rupert twice, because he's very rude to his governess once, and something I can remember once upstairs and once on the staircase at Heathfield. And Rupert often says, of course, when my mother beat me, he had a slipper twice. That's it. But I think that there's a little bit too much emphasis on not touching your children. I think sometimes when they're very small, they didn't get it, but I think if they needed it, I think a slap doesn't hurt them at all.
My earliest memories of Rupert are as a wonderful brother, quite naughty, quite daring when he was young, and I remember wonderful family picnics and Rupert being a terrific tease.
Like most Australian families at the time, the Murdochs came together around games and sport. At Cruden Farm, competitive instincts were encouraged.
I had hoped to grow up to be a lady test cricketer, and I had a little dog called Don Bradman, a Cairn Terrier, and the family all remember having to play cricket with me every day in the holidays, which they probably hated. But we had a lot of fun down here. It was wonderful. Rupert wasn't interested in team sports, really. He enjoyed playing tennis here. We had lots and lots of family tennis. My father, my mother, Helen, Rupert, Anne, we all played tennis. And Rupert always liked to win, of course. I think, in fact, I was meant to be born a boy. I think I was meant to be the second son, and it turned into the third girl. But anyway, that's an interesting thing. What might have happened then? There had been 2 boys in the family. Oh, Rupert would have won. Wouldn't have been room for 2, would there? I don't think.
He was not, you see, he was not a sort of person who liked playing in a team. He hated being sent out into the outfield at cricket and spent the time turning somersaults.
Increasingly, the young Rupert was drawn into his father's powerful world. Meeting people like Australia's future Prime Minister, Ben Chifley, was just part of growing up. It was also part of Keith Murdoch's dynastic ambitions for his son. Keith was building an empire for someone else, Melbourne's Herald and Weekly Times Group. He wrote opinionated and conservative editorials while boosting circulation with competitions and beauty contests. Young Rupert was a boarder at Geelong Grammar School, where he lived in the shadow of his father's reputation.
I didn't like it or dislike it particularly, but I would be teased and abused to some extent at boarding school. And I think my own children went through some of that. You know, to be the child of someone very much in the public eye and in public controversies, children do pay a price for that.
Keith was extraordinary with Rupert. At a very early age, he used to talk to him and discuss the newspapers and his plans and his hopes for the future. And I remember when Rupert was about 15 or 16, I said to Keith one day, he'd been discussing all sorts of things, you know, about the newspapers and the management and the finances and things. And I said, Keith, surely Rupert's too young for this. And I've always remembered, he said, no, dear, he said, I don't know how long I've got. I want him to really understand.
Mothers are always like that. I mean, my mother still treats me as a teenager. No, I think that, in fact, recently, I remember taking her for a holiday with my three sisters, and in America, and the four of us were walking on the beach, and my mother was sitting up on a sand dune, and these four white-haired people in their late 60s walking down the beach, and a voice coming from the sand dune saying, "Children, children, over here." As I say, she always thought that we were ahead of ourselves.
After leaving school, Rupert finally asserted his independence when he went to England to study at Oxford. To his parents' alarm, he flirted with left-wing politics.
I was naturally very rebellious, and that led me certainly into sort of joining the Labour Club, and I had some great experiences going out in elections and door knocking and so on. It was which got you into all sorts of neighbourhoods and small towns in England. It was a very good experience, and led me, I think, to more and more understanding and sympathy for people different to myself.
There is that sort of feeling that young people are more interesting and perhaps more worthwhile if they have leftish ideas, you know, when they're younger. And it's sometimes, I think, concern for people's welfare, and they see the inequalities, and we all regret very much the inequalities and the deprivations and the difficulties people have. But as you get older, you sometimes have to accept the fact that in many cases they are inevitable. It doesn't worry me when young people are rebellious, as long as they're reasonable.
In 1952, while still at Oxford, Rupert's life was changed forever when he received news of his father's sudden death at the age of 67.
I remember it very well. I guess it was just pure sort of shock, and I didn't really realize the change in my life and what it meant for a few days.
It was a terrible thing for Rupert to lose his father when he did, but he never would have developed as he's done, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know, but I've been very surprised. I think the challenge that Rupert was under at that early age was terrific, and I think that in meeting them and overcoming it, he grew tremendously.
Rupert Murdoch was just 22 when he returned to Australia to take control of the family company. His father had left them one key asset, a majority interest in the Adelaide News, a single struggling provincial newspaper. The boy publisher, free of his father's control, took over. The spectacular rise of the Dynasty was launched from an Adelaide newsroom.
There was a reluctance, of course, by people there to give me any authority. I was just a kid out of college. I think we made some pretty great mistakes, but also, you know, learned a lot of lessons. It was very, very valuable to be able to go into what was, well, that was an important position in a small community.
In Adelaide, Rupert Murdoch met and married Patricia Booker, an air hostess. The couple produced one daughter, but the marriage was a mismatch.
My mother was a wonderful person and very beautiful, but not particularly worldly. You know, she liked parties and things, my mum, and Dad's not ever been interested in things like that. And I think she just couldn't cope with him growing, really.
Already Adelaide was too small. Expand or die became the Murdoch motto. Magazines and newspapers from Melbourne to Perth. His first television station brought fresh wealth to the growing empire. The sleepy streets of Adelaide, and eventually Patricia, were left behind.
But I don't for a minute think that my father should have stayed with my mother, because I don't think they were well suited, and I don't think for a minute that she could have coped with the life that he has now. She definitely couldn't have coped with that.
The two sides of the Murdoch personality quickly asserted themselves. At first, the vulgar world of Sydney tabloid journalism was where Rupert seemed most at home. But then, he launched The Australian, Australia's first national newspaper, and the first paper he'd created himself. This was serious journalism, and would give him a key role in national debate. But the Murdoch tabloids would bankroll the growth of his empire and create his reputation for scandal. Rupert, as always, was unrepentant.
I'm not ashamed of any of my newspapers at all. I'm rather sick of snobs who tell us that they're bad papers, snobs who only read papers that no one else wants. I doubt if they read many papers at all. And whereas on most issues they consider themselves liberals or radicals or something, they think they ought to be imposing their taste on everybody else in the community.
I wouldn't say Rupert's an intellectual person. I think his strength is he's got, I think, a large brain. I think he must have to contain all these plans.
The big-thinking Rupert Murdoch arrived in London in 1968. He had come to buy the salacious weekly The News of the World. It would confirm his controversial and growing reputation.
When I was a kid, my parents, ordinary working-class people, wouldn't let the News of the World into the house. I was not allowed to read the News of the World as a schoolboy. It was regarded as a sleazy, disgusting paper.
When he bought the News of the World, nearly killed me, you know, and I said, you know, Rupert, why must he? He said, look, Mum, he said, you don't understand. There are tens, hundreds of thousands of people living in conditions in London, around England, who have nothing in their lives practically, and they want this sort of thing, you see.
Rupert's next London purchase, a daily tabloid, became hugely successful. But The Sun and its proprietor were loathed by the critics. Murdoch's papers would specialize in exposing private lives to public gaze. and by then he was often in the news himself. In 1967, he had married for the second time. Anna Torv was a cadet reporter from the Sydney Daily Mirror. In London, they had custody of Prudence, Rupert's daughter from his first marriage. At school, she now had to confront her father's unsavoury reputation.
There was a lot of reference to the dirty digger. You know, then I realised that, you know, that was kind of a known name by lots of people at school, you know, he used to have a dig at me about it. But girls can be cruel. But, you know, I could handle it.
Rupert Murdoch took pleasure in attacking the British establishment. Despite his own privileged background, he was a believer in the self-made man. He had a special dislike for the British aristocracy and its privileges.
Some of them, you know, had very good brains and very good educations. But not many of them made much of their lives. In terms of achievement, I mean, you can still read about them in the society pages because they're the Duke of this or that, but it's something different to people with an Australian background.
The Murdoch family was snubbed by the British establishment, but the Murdoch papers, especially The Sun, were making a fortune. To Anna's relief, this meant her husband could now set his sights on the most lucrative market of all. In the 1970s, the Murdochs, now with 2 young children, moved to the New World. New York was where the next members of the dynasty would be raised.
Growing up, particularly in New York has a grounding because everyone moves around on the street level, and you can be sharing a bus or getting on a subway, and you don't really see other people's families or their homes, or no one has fancy cars or anything like that. So there was a very grounding element to growing up in New York.
Most rich kids you meet are real pains in the neck. They're spoiled little brats. They were not. They were well brought up, they were polite, they had inquiring minds, they were intelligent. Anna Murdoch did a great job with the kids. So did Rupert too, although he wasn't there so much. He nevertheless spent quality time with them when he did.
It's not in our makeup to think that we are extraordinary, because if we started thinking that, it would be pretty quickly slapped out of us by Granny or Dad. And you just don't do that in this family.
We never felt we were different in any way. And even when I remember one cover of Time magazine that had my father as King Kong, and that was the first, probably the first memory that I have that, well, the other dads at school weren't on the cover of Time magazine portrayed as this monster.
The monster had just devoured 2 icons, the New York Post and New York Magazine. The Post was a liberal-leaning paper which was going broke.
25 cents for the New York Post. 25 cents for the New York Post.
Even if it's losing money, Rupert Murdoch always wants to own a newspaper in the city in which he's living. It keeps him at the heart of his 3 loves: journalism, politics, and power. In New York, the first test of his newly acquired influence came very quickly in the mayoral elections in 1977.
Well, it's me. I am back, and it is 4:04 at the talk station, News Talk 1050.
Today, Ed Koch is a larger-than-life New York identity. But in 1977, Congressman Ed Koch, a Democrat, was an unknown rank outsider in the race for mayor.
The poll showed that only 4% of the people in the city of New York knew who I was. Rupert held a conference where he personally interviewed all the candidates who were running for mayor. And that is when I first met him.
The Post's new owner asked each candidate what they would do about the unions, which he thought were pushing the city to the edge of bankruptcy. Koch told him he would take them on and beat them. 2 days later, Koch took a phone call at home.
The voice at the other end said, "Is Congressman Koch there?" I very guardedly said, "Who's calling, please?" And the voice that came back said, "Rupert." And in my head, I said, "Rupert, Rupert? That's not a Jewish name. Who is this guy?" And then, as he spoke, I could hear the Australian dialect, and it suddenly clicked. And I said, "Rupert, yes, this is Ed Koch." And he said, "Congressman, I don't know if it'll help or not, but we are coming out, the New York Post is coming out today in a front page endorsement of your candidacy for mayor." And I said to him, "Rupert, you've just elected me."
I think by saying, look, dear reader, you ought to vote Labour or you ought to vote Liberal or something, I think it's got zero influence. And then that's, you know, almost a waste of space. Although it's expected as a matter of form that you do it every 3 or 4 years.
I don't think it's true. He's being too modest. I believe I wouldn't be in a position to say I was once mayor of New York City if Rupert hadn't endorsed me. He gave me credibility.
Ed Koch became the mayor of New York, and Rupert Murdoch turned the Post around with the trusted formula of crime, scandal, and conservative opinion. The Murdoch empire had established a beachhead in a new colony, and the emperor's children were already being groomed for a future at the heart of power. They lived in style on Fifth Avenue.
My father would come home, we'd have to get dressed up to see him. We'd have half an hour with him alone, with the children, before a guest came over. And there'd always be, you know, very interesting journalists or authors or you know, local politicians and people who were in the news.
The Murdoch children learned very early that daily life in this family would be inseparable from business.
Liz and James and I would come up to breakfast before we had to get the bus to school, and all the papers would come out. And as we read the papers, my dad would be handing out stories to us and say, "Read that," or say this. Or he'd say, "Look at that headline, that's a shocking headline, and that's badly subbed," and you know, and so from a very early age, I'm talking now, these sort of conversations were like 7 years old and 8 years old, we understood, sort of began to understand that we were part of the media business.
Dad always said, "I'd very much like you all to be part of the company if that's what you want to do," almost verbatim. And always has, and I think that's still his take.
The Murdoch family and empire were growing together, climaxing in 1981 with Rupert's dramatic purchase of the London Times. Elated at the Times deal, Rupert returned to Australia for a family holiday. But there were warning signs that the growing demands of empire might eventually threaten this stable family life.
I have mixed feelings about it. I'm very happy for Rupert to have it. But for myself, speaking as a wife and a mother, it takes family time from us. It's not something that I really want. But if Rupert wants it and it makes him happy, I'm sure we'll sort it out. We've sorted it out before.
For Rupert Murdoch, as always, there was never a backward glance. His mind was back in London, where he was already reshaping his latest acquisitions. In 1983, he hired Scotsman Andrew Neil to edit the Sunday Times.
He sat down, got me a cup of coffee, started talking about all his worldwide interests as if I was his new closest best friend. He was always very charming, which of course is what he is. When you want something, the Murdoch charm offensive can take your breath away. Even left-wing politicians who loathe everything he stands for can be charmed out of their socks by him if he's in his charm mode.
Andrew Neil shared his new boss's free market views and low opinion of the British establishment. He became one of the few outsiders to get close to the Murdochs, even joining them for a family Christmas.
After Christmas dinner and the presents had been opened and all the rest of it, we started playing charades. Well, you had to be a Latin scholar to keep up. I mean, I've never played charades where Latin phrases become part of the charade that you have to guess. So it could be pretty tough.
We love getting in debates, and we hate, and so it gets to a point where sometimes family members will have dinner with people, and they will, if no one's really talking about much or no one is enjoying a debate, we'll start taking positions against each other we don't really believe in, but we just want to, cause some excitement.
He liked his kids to compete with each other. I mean, he liked them to show a sense of rivalry between them. He liked to see how they performed between each other. And as time went on, even he brought Elizabeth, his second daughter, into that. To begin with, he never thought a woman could run anything. But as time went on and he grew up and he realized that we were moving into a woman's world, she was invited to compete with the two boys as well. But the competition was quite civilized. I mean, it wasn't, he wasn't setting them at each other's throats. But he always let them believe that there was a prize at the end and that they had to compete for that prize.
In the 1980s, the gleaming prize of News Corporation continued to grow. Newspapers, magazines, book publishing, and a slice of Hollywood. But one thing stood in the way of Rupert Murdoch acquiring an American television network. He was not an American. In 1985, this was fixed. He turned his back on Australia and became an American citizen in a ceremony in New York.
I was incredibly moved by the occasion and found it incredibly exciting. Not so much because Dad was part of it, as we were witnessing something that actually had a lot of meaning. And I felt like we sort of embraced the United States on that day.
The Murdoch ambition had uprooted his family from Australia. One country was always going to be too small. They were now international citizens. The corporation would become their true home.
I hate to say this because I'm embarrassed, but I was born in London and grew up a great part of my life in the early years in the U.S. Picked up this bloody accent, which I wish I could get rid of, but I can't. And but always came back to Australia. And all my family's from Australia, so we've always felt from the time I was a very young child until now that we are Australians living overseas, expatriates.
I'd love to be a citizen of Australia and of the United States. I'm not saying that I'd give up being a citizen here in order to be a citizen of Australia, but yes, I would certainly be very happy to be known as, and in fact, a citizen of both countries.
The Murdoch family was uprooted again after Rupert bought 20th Century Fox in Los Angeles and finally his own American TV network. The family moved from New York to this house above the new slice of the empire. It put the Murdoch dynasty at the center of the world's most lucrative market, where entertainment and information are produced and traded. A city built on such deals was a natural magnet for Rupert Murdoch. And from his headquarters at 20th Century Fox, he remains restless for more.
What gets him out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning is the prospect of making and clinching a deal. He is probably the most inventive, the bravest deal maker that the media world has ever known.
Right, but have they got the money? That's great. Congratulations. When do you think they'll get back to you?
Rupert Murdoch once said to me, I was in Aspen with him, he said, let's go down to Aspen and buy a paper. And I said, now, Rupert, when you say buy a paper, do you mean we're going to put 15 cents down and buy the Aspen Times, or are we going to buy a paper? And he just said, let's just buy the Aspen Times.
I think, as in everything in life, you know, when it's going well, push it. And when it's going badly, go home. So you shouldn't limit what you think you can win, but you must limit what you lose. You can tell them, you know, as a result of a lot of debate in the company, and I laid down absolutely we had to do this. No. Oh, I think I'm in Europe with John Law.
Rupert Murdoch has no further need for wealth. The gambling instinct still drives his ambition. The Calvinistic streak inherited from his father provides the justification.
People, particularly ourselves, should work hard. It's a work ethic that's certainly part of it. And I think also a little bit of self-effacement. I don't want to exaggerate that, but I'd say that, you know, it's a feeling that personal modesty is becoming, and you look for that in your children.
News Corporation is made in Rupert Murdoch's image. He may be impossible to replicate. But like his own father, Rupert expects his children to eventually take over.
They'll be the biggest shareholders collectively in News Corporation. And I think all of them, but particularly my two sons, are very interested in having major careers. And I'm doing what I can to train them and give them opportunities and see what mistakes they make and what triumphs they have. Both have had a share of both.
I don't quite understand now how he reconciles his belief in meritocracy and on the strength of the self-made person with the idea now that if you work in News Corp, you know that the very top jobs can never be available to you because you weren't born into the right family.
Rupert and Anna's 3 children were fast-tracked into the top levels of the empire while still in their 20s. Elizabeth was made second in charge of B-Sky B television in London. James was sent to Hong Kong to run Star, the Asian satellite television service. Lachlan, at 25, was made chairman of News Limited in Australia.
I try to treat them just as well or as firmly as I treat any other executives in the company. There's no doubt that, you know, maybe they're getting more opportunities, which, if it's overdone, can be very unfair. They've got to live up to those opportunities before they move on to the next one.
Not everything has gone according to plan. Elizabeth was unhappy at B-Sky B and left to start her own production company.
I think he was a little surprised that I decided to leave. I think there might have been a little bit of hurt in some ways. He'd never say that, but kind of, oh, okay. But I think also great pride. I think he got it.
She's not given up her ambitions by any means to play a part in the company. But we'll have to see how things settle down in England and her own career as she goes with that.
In Hong Kong, James has yet to make a major impact. Lachlan was associated with the collapse of Australian phone company OneTel. But he now works closest to his father and has been promoted to one of the top jobs in the corporation.
We're all striving to prove ourselves in those jobs, and it's a speculation about the fact that we must all be thinking about, you know, what may or may not happen in 20 or 30 years' time it's gotten to a point where it's boring, because as journalists find less and less evidence of anything like that. They just keep rewriting their own stories, which I guess is an old journalistic trick.
Mistakes have been made by them, and they've been very, very few, but they've been the first to come in and discuss them. There are more mistakes made by me every day than by them collectively.
I think he gave all of us, and I think I would look to it in myself, a sense of braveness, that it's okay to make mistakes, that if you work hard and you think laterally, and you take risks, you're actually okay.
Let's say that you were Chelsea.
Rupert's children have much to live up to. Their father's unique and controlling stamp is on every aspect of a complex empire.
I'm saying, look, we shouldn't get carried away by any of these figures on pay-per-view. Wait until it's been going up 3 or 4 months and it gets popular, and then people start getting the monthly bills. Because people are going to say, hey, I'm used to paying for Sky £33 a month. I buy everything. I'm suddenly paying £65 a month. Huh? And mum or dad or someone is going to say, you can't watch all these things. I just think there's a limit to what people are prepared to spend.
All power in News Corporation emanates from this office.
And the other one that's keenly interested
To have authority, you must have access to this man. But outsiders cannot expect to inherit the throne. In 1994, Andrew Neil was dropped from the inner circle and left News Corporation. The family has always come first. And with growing wealth came celebrity. Their private lives now exposed to public speculation. Through it all, it was Anna who tried to hold the scattered family together. As the children left home, she hoped in vain that her husband might have more time for her. Finally, he left as well.
It was a pretty sad event for both of us, but we decided to go our own ways. I think she was looking forward to saying, well, we've done all that, and you really ought to retire. And we should be spending time together and playing golf or whatever. And retirement was something that just was not on my radar screen and still isn't.
I was amazed by that breakup in the marriage. It was a very tight, close marriage. They complemented each other very well. And at the end of the day, it showed that not only were editors and chief executives of film studios expendable, even the wife was expendable in the end, even after 30 years.
In some sense, we were quite honestly very surprised by it, but at the same time, we had our own relationships and understood that sometimes the world isn't perfect and that people can grow apart.
I think that despite any child's desire that their parents stay together, ultimately you also hope that for whatever reasons they make their decision that they're happy.
For Rupert Murdoch, happiness would lie with a 30-year-old associate, Wendy Deng. Anna Murdoch remarried, but has been bitter about the breakup.
Oh, there's no black and whites in these matters. They're sort of greys. You know? Who's responsible for what actions or what's said or what's done? But yeah, that's very, you know, you're boarding in sort of very sort of intimate stuff here, but I think genuinely we grew apart. And if you can say you want to blame me, you want to say, well, it was perhaps neglect on my part.
The daughter of a Chinese factory director, Wendy Deng was an intern at Murdoch Star TV and acted as his interpreter during his frequent trips into China. She was less than half his age. and they fell in love.
I couldn't believe it, actually. I just thought, you dirty old man. And because I had been comforting him about the breakdown of his marriage on a holiday in Greece, and had spent my whole holiday thinking, what do you say to your father when he's, you know, going through divorce? And then he rang me up and said, oh, and by the way, I've met this lady. And I just thought, you know, what are you like? And then I, you know, knew how old she was. But, you know, then I met her, and she's fantastic.
Wendy makes Dad very happy, and she's delightful, and it's something I couldn't have foreseen, but, you know, Dad seems extremely happy, and Wendy seems extremely happy, and you can't begrudge them their happiness.
Rupert Murdoch's marriage to Wendy Deng launched the dynasty into uncharted waters. But for Rupert, life has begun again. In New York, he's moved to downtown Soho. Just a few blocks from his son Lachlan, he's renovated a 3-level apartment for his new bride and future family. Surrounded by the best of Australian art, this is where the new members of the dynasty will be raised when in New York.
It keeps me young. We're very, very happy. We enjoy good health. It's introduced me to you know, sort of a new culture, being married to someone Chinese, which is different, particularly since she has a lot of Chinese friends, and not that I understand a word they're talking to each other about.
During the summer of 2001, Rupert and Wendy moved to the beachside in Los Angeles. A new location, a new wife, and a new family on the way.
Every woman wants to have children. Secondly, I was very happy to go along with it. I've no doubt that, apart from my own children, a lot of them think, you know, it's a 70-year-old man doing sowing kids, but that's life. You know, things are different these days. We're all going to live to be 100, 120, but certainly 100. Plenty of time.
I think they're both insane, but then again, I have 3, and I think Dad's forgotten what it's like. You know, I think when you're in love with someone, you want to have children with them. It makes sense. I think I'm so surprised, but it's you know, I can't wait to welcome the baby. You know, it'll be exciting.
How's your
All right,
workout?
how was the walk?
It's good.
Didn't make you too tired?
You walk too fast.
I said a half round.
I know.
Ambled.
I can't walk because it's
My
heavy.
legs were stiff this morning. I went all the way up and down.
It's amazing. Getting so fit.
I wish.
I'm getting bigger. He's getting smaller and fit. We're really happy.
We're both very excited.
Yep.
You can look at the camera now, like an interviewer. It'll learn to perform.
Okay. I'm not very good.
What are your hopes? Never wanted to be.
Be healthy.
Naturally brilliant and happy, but mainly happy leader.
And, you know, have good values, not get spoiled. Right?
Right. A little bit of Chinese discipline around the house.
Maybe bilingual would be good. I think I'll speak Chinese only. He will speak English only. So the baby can speak 2 languages quite easily when they're that young.
That's the theory. Maybe it'll be no language. We'll see.
Aww.
Be confused. No, it should work well.
Yeah.
You'll be the perfect mother.
Yeah.
Stay at home and nurse the baby.
Could be perfect father, change diapers.
I'll be the perfect father and employ a nanny.
So much of the future of the Murdoch dynasty revolves around the health of this man. He survived one recent scare, a brush with prostate cancer. But Rupert Murdoch genuinely believes that he will live to be at least 100, despite already being past the age when his own father died.
It's only yesterday that I was down at the hospital. They're having about a week's test compressed into 3 hours. And as far as my heart went, which is what killed my father, it was perfection. No cholesterol virtually, and everything else going perfectly.
The owner of the parent company of this channel is a parent himself yet again, Mr. Rupert Murdoch and his wife Wendy, celebrating the birth of their daughter this day.
The new arrival brings inevitable speculation about the future of the dynasty, the inheritance, and Rupert Murdoch's own ambitions for his new daughter, Grace.
Oh, the same as my hopes for the other children. Exactly the same. That they'll all be happy and live useful and fulfilled lives. What it'll be, God knows. Child may decide to go off and be a brain surgeon, or she may want to come to the company. We'll see.
This will make the episodes of Dallas and Dynasty look like boring soaps compared to the real-life Murdoch operation here, because here you have already a complicated succession with the two boys and Elizabeth Murdoch, and with Prudence from his first marriage way in the wings. Now you have a new Dauphin, whose mother is the current wife of Rupert Murdoch. She herself very ambitious and very smart.
Well, we don't think about it. I mean, it's a family member who'll be welcomed and loved and supported, and it's a little baby, new little soul. So it's that's not really something that we would ever sort of talk about necessarily.
I don't see why it should have any effect on the harmony or the future of the family. And I don't think that anyone should speculate otherwise. This is the problem with our family. People don't understand the kind of people we are. It's not about speculating about the future of the family and the company. It's just there, and we are all here, and we will continue, and it will be lovely.
But how long can all this continue? In a world of ruthless takeovers, News Corporation has remained under family control. Yet the Murdoch family shareholding now stands at only 30%. Once Rupert Murdoch himself has gone, the remaining shareholders will have to be convinced of the virtue of one family's dynastic dream.
You've seen great companies go by the wayside because there have been no major shareholders. They have a bad year or two, and the Wall Street piranhas move in, and then someone else takes it over, and there's maybe wrecks it, maybe makes it better. You may say that's the marketplace working. I think there's a great deal to be said for a media company to have stability of leadership. In newspapers, I believe there are certain, Lachlan could answer me better on that.
This is not a totalitarian toy for them to play with. This is not a monarchy. This is a modern, public, limited company. At the end, picking a company on the basis of the people who run a company on the basis of their genetic makeup is not a way to survive. The world's too competitive. Look at Fairfax in Australia. Look at Beaverbrook in this country. Biggest newspaper company ever. Doesn't exist anymore. Tried to do it through family. And so it'll be interesting in the years ahead to watch this attempt at building a Murdoch dynasty will collapse.
Oh, I just want them to be happy, and I hope to be able to leave them a great opportunity like my father left me. But they don't have to follow that. They'll be perfectly free to say we don't want it. All the signs are they want it very much. I just hope they don't push me out too soon.